Good evening. Tonight we're crawling into the chimneys of Victorian London where small children scraped their way through darkness for pennies. Delightful. Before we begin, you might consider subscribing if you enjoy falling asleep to histories of institutional child labor. Completely your choice. And if you'd like to tell me what time it is where you are, or where in the world you're listening from, feel free. Or don't. Let's set the scene with rain. The kind that never quite commits to a downpour but refuses to stop either. Take a slow breath in, hold it for a moment. Let it go. The rain is falling outside your window now, tapping against glass in that persistent, apologetic way rain has. It drips from eaves. It pools in the street. It makes everything smell like wet stone and old wood, like the city itself is slowly dissolving. Listen to it for a moment, that steady, meaningless rhythm. There, now we can begin. You wake before dawn in a room that barely qualifies as a room. It's more of a gap between walls in Southwark, a space where your master keeps his climbing boys like tools in a shed. The floor is packed dirt. The ceiling sags. There are 6 of you sleeping in a pile for warmth, because blankets cost money and master doesn't see the point. You're 7 years old, perhaps 8, nobody's entirely sure, including you. Your birthday wasn't the sort of thing anyone wrote down. The master's boot finds your ribs, not violently, just enough to wake you. Up, he says, in that flat voice he uses before dawn. You untangle yourself from the other boys and stand, your joints creaking in ways joints shouldn't creak at 7. Your knees are scabbed, your elbows are raw. There's soot ground so deeply into your skin that you've forgotten what color you originally were. Probably pink, like other children. Now you're gray. You dress, which is to say you were already dressed because you sleep in your work clothes. A shirt that might have been brown once, trousers held up with rope. No shoes. Shoes don't fit in chimneys, and besides, bare feet grip better on the bricks. The climbing boys of Victorian London were small, expendable, and alarmingly affordable. A master sweep could purchase an orphan or a pauper's child outright, or simply rent them from parents desperate enough to see children as income sources. 4 shillings a year was the going rate for a child's labor, less than most families spent on tea. The return on investment was excellent, assuming the child survived long enough to pay it. Master sweeps operated as small businessmen, moving from house to house with their teams of boys and their scrapers and brushes. The 1788 Chimney Sweepers Act had set a minimum age of 8 years old, which master sweeps interpreted as a gentle suggestion rather than a law. Enforcement was handled by magistrates who had their own chimneys to clean and their own relationships with master sweeps to maintain. So boys as young as 4 went up flues, because 4-year-olds fit where 8-year-olds didn't, and fitting was rather the entire point. The work was simple in theory. Chimneys accumulated soot, a mix of coal tar, creosote, and partially burned carbon that clung to brick and narrowed the passage. Left too long, it caught fire. So someone had to climb up and scrape it down. Adults didn't fit, children did. Problem solved from a certain brutally practical perspective. The rain hasn't stopped. It's sliding down the window now in long, wandering trails, each drop following the path of the drop before it. You can hear it in the streets below, turning the dust to mud, filling the gaps between cobblestones. Somewhere a gutter is overflowing, spilling water in a steady stream. The sound is constant, reliable. The rain doesn't care about chimneys or children or anything else. It just falls. Rest your shoulders, let them drop. There's nothing to hold up right now. You follow the master through streets still dark, carrying his brushes in a sack that's nearly as large as you are. London before dawn is a particular kind of quiet, not peaceful, just waiting. The lamplighters are finishing their rounds. The night soil men are loading their carts. A few drunks lean against walls, deciding whether to go home or simply sleep where they are. The master walks fast. You walk faster because falling behind means his boot again, and you've had enough of his boot for one morning. Your bare feet slap against wet cobblestones. The cold doesn't bother you anymore. You're not sure you feel cold the way you used to. Your body has made certain adjustments, certain compromises with discomfort. It had to. You arrive at a tall, narrow house in Bloomsbury, where a servant is already waiting at the servants' entrance, looking annoyed that you're late. Though you aren't late, she's simply the sort of person who looks annoyed preventatively. The master nods. She leads you inside without a word. The family is still asleep upstairs, and they prefer not to know the details of how their chimneys get clean. They just want them clean. How it happens is a question for servants and sweeps and children who don't matter. The house smells different than yours, if you can call your space a house. This place smells like beeswax and lavender, and bread baking somewhere deep in the kitchen. It smells like people who eat regularly. The servant leads you to the drawing room where a fireplace looms, mouth open, waiting. It's been cold since last night. The family wants it lit again by 7. That gives you perhaps 90 minutes. The master peers up the flue with his candle, assessing. Narrow, he says, which is what he always says because chimneys are always narrow. That's why he bought you instead of a larger boy. You're an investment in smallness. He looks at you. Straight up, turn at the bedroom, scrape the crown. Don't get stuck. Excellent advice. You'll be sure to keep that in mind. You strip off your shirt because fabric catches on bricks, and besides, there's no point ruining a shirt faster than necessary. You take your scraper, a flat piece of metal with an edge that might have been sharp once, and you step into the fireplace. The bricks are still warm from last night's fire. Not hot, just warm enough to remind you that 12 hours ago this would have been a very bad place to be. You look up. The flue is a black vertical tunnel, maybe 14 inches wide, maybe less. You've been up worse. You wedge your back against one wall, your knees against the other, and you begin to climb. In pictures, the technique was called chimney climbing, though wedging yourself upward through a space designed for smoke, not children, would have been more accurate. A boy would press his back against one wall and his knees against the opposite wall, creating friction. Then he would inch upward, shifting back and knees alternately, scraping at the soot as he climbed. The soot would fall on his face, into his eyes, into his mouth. He would breathe it with every breath, because there was no choice about breathing. The flues twisted, they narrowed. They branched off toward different fireplaces on different floors. A good climbing boy learned to navigate by feel, by memory, by the faint change in air temperature that indicated an opening. A bad climbing boy got lost in the dark and had to be retrieved, assuming he could be retrieved at all. Some chimneys were too narrow for a boy to turn around in. If you went up, the only way out was up. Master sweeps preferred boys between 4 and 10 years old. Younger than 4, they lacked the strength to climb. Older than 10, they grew, which was terribly inconvenient. The ideal climbing boy was small, obedient, expendable, and, this was crucial, not prone to panic in enclosed spaces. Panic made boys freeze. Frozen boys blocked chimneys. Blocked chimneys cost time, and time cost money. So the masters developed motivational techniques. If a boy hesitated or refused to climb, the master might light a small fire in the grate below, nothing dangerous, just enough smoke to encourage upward movement. Or he might reach up with a long pole tipped with pins, providing gentle encouragement through the soles of the boy's feet. These methods were considered effective, which they were in the sense that they produced the desired result. Listen to the rain for a moment. It's found a loose shingle somewhere, and now it's dripping in a slow, irregular rhythm. Drip, pause, drip, drip. There's no pattern to predict, no reason to stay alert. Just water falling, because that's what water does. Your breath can match it, slow and irregular, and completely without purpose. Breathe in when you think of it. Breathe out when you remember. The rain will still be there either way. You're 10 feet up now, wedged in darkness so complete you can't see your own hands. The soot is thick here, years of coal fires compressed into a tarry coating that flakes off in greasy chunks when you scrape. It falls past you, down onto the hearth below where the master will collect it. Soot sells. Not for much, but enough. Some families buy it for their gardens, some dyers use it. Your master sells it by the sack to whoever wants it, because waste is unprofitable, and every penny counts when you're running a sweep operation. Your knees are bleeding again, you can feel it, the warm wetness mixing with the soot turning to a paste. The bricks have rough patches, places where the mortar crumbled or the brick fired unevenly, and these rough patches find the same spots on your knees every time. You have scabs on your scabs, scars under your scabs. The skin has thickened there, trying to protect itself, but skin can only do so much against stone. You reach the bend, the place where this flue turns horizontal for 6 feet, before shooting upward again toward the bedroom fireplace. You have to lie flat now, wriggling forward on your elbows, scraping as you go. The space is tighter here. Your shoulders barely fit. You exhale to make yourself smaller, then pull yourself forward an inch, then exhale again. This is the part where boys get stuck. This is the part where boys die, wedged horizontal in a space too tight to breathe properly, too narrow to turn around, waiting for someone to either pull them forward or knock through the wall to retrieve their body. The horizontal section seems longer than you remember, or perhaps you're moving slower. It's difficult to judge distance when you can't see and can't properly breathe and are primarily focused on not panicking. Panic is the enemy. Panic makes you gasp, and gasping makes your chest expand, and expanding makes you stuck. So you don't panic. You've learned this lesson already, back when you were 5 and got wedged in a flue in Whitechapel, and the master had to knock a hole in the bedroom wall to extract you. He wasn't pleased about that. He didn't hit you. Hitting would have bruised you, and bruised boys couldn't climb for a few days, but he stopped feeding you for a week to help you slim down. Very motivating. You emerge from the horizontal section and start upward again. This flue is cleaner. The bedroom fireplace doesn't get used as often. Rich people have more fireplaces than they need. They light them for show, for guests, for the aesthetic pleasure of flames. You've heated yourself by a fire perhaps a dozen times in your life. Usually you just work near them or inside them, which isn't the same thing at all. You reach the top. Fresh air hits your face. Well, London air, which is fresh only in comparison to being inside a chimney. You scrape the crown, dislodging the last chunks of soot, then begin your descent. Going down is faster. You let gravity help. Your back scrapes against the bricks. You're leaving skin there probably, but you left skin there last week too, and it grew back more or less. The economics of chimney sweeping formed a neat pyramid of exploitation. At the top sat the householders, who paid master sweeps between 2 and 6 shillings per chimney, depending on height and difficulty. The master sweep kept most of this, paying out perhaps 4p per day to each climbing boy. Though paying is generous, many masters simply provided food and shelter and considered that payment enough. The boys themselves had no bargaining power, being either purchased outright, apprenticed against their will, or orphaned into the trade by institutions that preferred to see children employed rather than fed at public expense. A successful master sweep might own 5 or 6 boys and clean 30 chimneys a week during the busy season, autumn through spring, when fires burned daily. That's perhaps £7 per week in revenue minus the cost of feeding 6 small children, which ran to about £1 if you fed them cheaply. Bread, mostly. Some weak tea, potatoes when they could be had. The profit margin was acceptable, assuming your boys didn't die inconveniently during the expensive months when you'd need to purchase replacements. The boys themselves accumulated nothing. No wages to save, no skills that transferred to other trades, no literacy. Most masters saw no point in teaching climbing boys to read, as literacy didn't improve their ability to scrape soot. They accumulated only soot, injuries, and a chronic cough that most of them assumed was simply how breathing worked. The 1840 Climbing Boys Act attempted to change this arrangement. It forbade the apprenticing of boys under 16 to chimney sweeps and prohibited anyone under 21 from actually climbing chimneys. Parliament was very proud of this law. They'd done something compassionate. They protected children. Then they went home to their townhouses and lit their fires and didn't ask too many questions about how their chimneys stayed clean, because the master sweeps continued sending boys up flues and the magistrates continued looking the other way, and reform is much easier to legislate than to enforce. The rain is settling into something steady now, not a storm. London doesn't often do storms, preferring instead this persistent grey drizzle that lasts for days. You can hear it on the roof, a soft static that never quite resolves into individual drops. It's the sound of dampness accumulating, of wood swelling, of stone darkening. Your breathing can slow to match it. In for 4 counts, out for 6. Nothing urgent, nothing that requires your attention. Just rain doing what rain does with no audience and no expectations. You drop out of the fireplace onto the hearth, and the master nods. Good, he says, which is the closest he comes to praise. The servant hands him his payment, 3 shillings for 2 chimneys, which is reasonable and shows you both to the door. You pull your shirt back on. It sticks to the soot on your back. You'll sleep in it tonight, because washing clothes is a luxury reserved for people who have more than one set. The next house is in Mayfair, then another in Marylebone, then 2 more in Kensington. You climb all morning, flue after flue, some straight, some bent, some barely wide enough for you to fit. Your master has 6 boys, but you're the smallest, so you get the narrowest chimneys. This is simultaneously a privilege and a curse. Privilege because it means you're valuable. Curse because narrow chimneys are the worst chimneys, the ones where other boys get stuck and suffocate. By noon, you've climbed 8 flues. Your knees have stopped bleeding because they've stopped having liquid blood to bleed. It's all mixed with soot now, dried to a crust. Your throat feels like you've swallowed sand. Actually, you've swallowed soot, which is worse than sand in most measurable ways. You cough, and black phlegm comes up. This is normal. All the climbing boys cough up black phlegm. It's practically a professional requirement. The master buys you lunch, which sounds more generous than it is. Lunch is a penny pie from a street vendor, mostly potato and gravy, with an optimistic rumor of meat somewhere in its past. You eat it standing in an alley while the master smokes his pipe and calculates his earnings. The other boys eat nearby, squatting against a wall. Nobody talks much. Talking requires energy, and energy is for climbing. There's a hierarchy among the climbing boys, subtle but absolute. The oldest boy, Thomas, who's maybe 11, gets the easiest chimneys, the ones with good ventilation and gentle angles. He's outgrowing the trade, getting too broad in the shoulders, and the master is already looking for his replacement. Thomas knows this. You all know this. In another year, he'll be turned out to find work elsewhere, with no references, no skills except climbing chimneys and lungs that whistle when he breathes. Then there's William, who's 9 and mean, in the efficient way of children who've learned that cruelty is a survival skill. He steals food. He trips smaller boys. He's positioning himself to be Thomas's replacement, the senior boy who gets preferential treatment. You stay away from William. You're near the bottom of the hierarchy by virtue of being small and new. You've only been climbing for 2 years. Below you is just Henry, who's 6 and cries at night, which everyone pretends not to hear because acknowledging it would require caring, and caring is expensive. The master sweeps themselves occupied a complicated social position. They were tradesmen, certainly, but not respectable ones. No guild represented them, no livery company claimed them. They existed in the gap between legitimate business and outright exploitation, providing a necessary service through methods that made polite society uncomfortable when forced to think about it, which polite society tried very hard not to do. Some masters were former climbing boys themselves who'd survived long enough to inherit or purchase their master's business. These men understood the work intimately and sometimes, not often but sometimes, showed marginal kindness to their boys, remembering what it was like to be small and afraid and stuck in darkness. Other masters were simply entrepreneurs who'd identified a profitable niche and purchased their first boy the way one might purchase a cart or a ladder, as equipment. The boys called their masters master, never by name. This was partly tradition, partly self-protection. Names implied relationship, and relationship implied obligations beyond the contractual minimum. Better to keep it simple: master and boy, employer and tool, person and property. Some masters were known to be worse than others. Everyone in the trade knew which masters beat their boys unconscious, which ones refused to feed them, which ones sent boys up hot chimneys, flues that had been burning hours before, still radiating heat that would blister skin on contact. But knowing didn't mean anything changed. The boys who worked for cruel masters had nowhere else to go. Orphanages wouldn't take them back. Workhouses wouldn't feed them. The street would kill them faster than the chimneys, so they stayed and climbed and hoped. The rain has found its rhythm now, steady and reliable as a heartbeat. It drums on awnings, it gurgles in downspouts, it creates a curtain of sound between you and the rest of the world, muffling everything, softening everything. Your jaw can unclench. Your tongue can rest against the bottom of your mouth, instead of pressing against your teeth. There's nothing to figure out, nothing to decide. Just rain falling because gravity exists and clouds are impermanent. Let it fall. You don't have to watch it or count it or remember it. It will rain without your supervision. Brings more chimneys near Threadneedle Street, a solicitor's office in Gray's Inn, private club in St. James's where the doorman makes you wait in the mews because climbing boys aren't permitted to enter through the front. You climb their chimneys anyway. The soot doesn't know which door you came through. Your body is developing its professional deformities. Your knees are bowing slightly inward from the constant pressure of climbing. Your spine is curving, not dramatically yet, but enough that you notice when you try to stand fully straight. Your elbows have calluses thick as shoe leather. These are the marks of the trade, the signs that you're becoming a proper climbing boy. In a few years, if you survive, you'll be too deformed to do any other work. Very convenient for your master, who won't have to worry about you leaving for better employment. The worst part isn't the climbing itself. The worst part is the soot. It works its way into everything. Your ears, your nose, your eyes. It stains your teeth black. It dyes your skin. But more than that, it gets inside you. You can feel it in your lungs, a weight that never quite leaves. Every breath tastes like coal smoke. Every cough brings up black. The other boys are the same. You all wheeze. You all hack. You all know what it means. Though nobody says it directly, the soot is killing you slowly from the inside out. There's a name for what the soot does to you, though you won't learn it for years. The doctors call it soot wart, or if they're being formal, scrotal carcinoma. It appears first as a small sore, usually in your early 20s, usually on your scrotum or inner thighs, places where soot accumulates against skin, where sweat mixes with tar and creosote, and creates a chemical burn that doesn't heal. The sore grows. It ulcerates. Eventually it kills you, slowly and painfully, assuming the tuberculosis or the silicosis or the simple act of getting stuck in a flue doesn't kill you first. But you're 7, you don't know this yet. You just know that the older boys sometimes show each other strange sores and joke about them nervously. and that Thomas went to see a parish doctor once who told him there was nothing to be done and charged him 3p for the pleasure of hearing it. By late afternoon, you've climbed 14 chimneys. Your master is pleased. 14 is a good day. He's made nearly £2, which is more than a labourer makes in a week. Of course, the labourer doesn't have to purchase and feed 6 boys, but still, the margins are acceptable. You've made nothing, but you've been fed, which counts as payment in the moral accounting system your master employs. The last house is in Belgravia, a mansion with 16 fireplaces and a housekeeper who looks at you the way one might look at a rat, necessary for the removal of a problem, but distasteful nonetheless. She leads you to the servant's stair and tells you to keep your hands to yourself and not to breathe on anything. You don't bother pointing out that breathing on things is somewhat unavoidable when you're breathing. This chimney is old, built when fireplaces were larger and chimneys were designed by people who didn't quite understand draft efficiency. It branches 3 ways at the 2nd floor, and you have to climb all 3 branches, scraping each one. The work takes an hour. Your arms are shaking by the time you finish. Your legs keep cramping. You're running on pie and desperation, which is what you always run on. But today the pie was particularly inadequate. The 1840 Act was followed by further legislation in 1864, which Parliament once again congratulated itself for passing. This new law mandated that master sweeps obtain licenses and face penalties for employing children under 10. The penalties were fines of up to £10, a substantial sum, theoretically devastating. In practice, prosecutions were rare. Magistrates were often householders themselves, dependent on chimney sweeps, uninterested in disrupting a system that worked adequately from their perspective. The boys were orphans, or near enough. They had no parents to advocate for them, no social standing to make their suffering matter. Besides, the chimneys needed cleaning. That was simply a fact of urban life. Someone had to climb them. If not these boys, then which boys? The sweeps developed workarounds. They claimed their boys were older than they were, difficult to disprove when birth records were sparse, and boys were malnourished enough to look younger anyway. They sent boys up chimneys at night or early morning when inspectors weren't working. They moved from district to district, staying ahead of any magistrate who showed signs of enforcing the law. The system bent but didn't break. It wasn't until 1875, when the Public Health Act gave police powers to enter premises and made enforcement someone's actual job, that the practice began to decline. And even then, it persisted in rural areas and among the poorest households for another decade. Reform moves at the speed of institutional willingness, which is to say slowly, with frequent stops for tea. Outside, the rain has thickened slightly, not quite heavy, but purposeful. It's washing the streets, carrying the day's accumulated filth toward the Thames, which accepts all offerings without judgment. The sound is fuller now, layered rain on stone, rain on wood, rain on the few trees that London allows itself. You can hear it without listening for it. It's simply there, surrounding everything the way air is there. Let your shoulders sink into whatever they're resting against. Let your face soften. The rain doesn't need you to pay attention. It's falling for its own reasons. From the final chimney, as the light is fading, winter afternoons in London die quickly, the sun giving up early as if it has better places to be. Gas lamps are being lit. The lamplighters move from post to post with their long poles, leaving small circles of yellow light behind them like breadcrumbs. The master counts his money, subtracts the cost of tomorrow's food, and considers his boys. Good work, he says, which means, you didn't get stuck, you didn't break anything, you didn't cost me extra. This is as close as he comes to affection. You walk back to Southwark in the dark, your bare feet slapping against wet cobblestones. Your body aches in that deep, comprehensive way that means you've used muscles you didn't know you had. Or perhaps you're using muscles wrong, bending them at angles they weren't designed for. Bodies are remarkably adaptable, up to a point. Past that point, they simply break in interesting ways. Other climbing boys pass on the street, heading home with their own masters. You recognize some of them. Charlie, who works for a master in Lambeth. Sam, who's got a twisted foot from getting stuck last year. Little James, who's 4 and shouldn't be climbing yet, but is anyway because his master has narrow chimneys and no scruples. You don't wave. They don't wave. Everyone's too tired for social niceties. Back at the master's house, there's a pot of something boiling that might be soup if you're generous with the definition. Mostly it's water with potato peels and an onion that's seen better days. The master's wife ladles it into bowls. Wooden bowls that never quite get clean, so they have a permanent film of previous meals coating them. You eat it anyway. Hunger doesn't leave room for standards. Thomas gets an extra piece of bread because he's the oldest and the master wants to keep him functional for another season. William gets extra because he steals it when no one's looking. You get what you're given and eat it slowly, making it last because the next meal is 14 hours away. After dinner, there's a brief window of nothing, no climbing, no walking, no master watching. The boys sit in the dirt floor room, too tired to speak much. Henry cries quietly in the corner, homesick for a home that probably wasn't very good, but was at least familiar. William tells him to shut up. Thomas says nothing, staring at the wall with the expression of someone calculating how many more chimneys he has in him before his body gives up entirely. You sit and feel the day settling into your bones, your knees throb, your back aches. Your lungs feel thick, congested with soot that won't come up no matter how much you cough. This is normal. This is every day. This is what being a climbing boy means. Being tired in your skeleton, dirty in your pores, old in your child's body. The climbing boys existed in a peculiar space in Victorian consciousness, simultaneously pitied and ignored. Recognized as suffering and yet perpetually available for employment. They appeared in penny dreadfuls as tragic figures. They showed up in reform pamphlets as evidence of society's moral failures. Charles Kingsley wrote about them. Lord Shaftesbury campaigned for them. The public felt very sorry for climbing boys. Right up until the moment their own chimneys needed cleaning, there were superstitions about them. Some householders believed that a climbing boy's presence brought bad luck, that the soot they carried was cursed or contaminated with something worse than coal tar. Others believed the opposite, that chimney sweeps brought good luck, that touching a sweep's hand or his buttons would ensure fortune. These beliefs existed simultaneously without contradiction, because superstition doesn't require internal consistency. The boys themselves had their own superstitions. Some believed that whistling in a chimney would make you stuck. Others believed that saying certain words, dead, stuck, fall, would curse the climb. There were rituals. You touched the left side of the fireplace before entering. You never looked down once you started climbing. You counted to 10 before beginning your descent. Whether any of this helped was debatable, but it gave the illusion of control. And illusion was sometimes enough to keep you from panicking, which was more useful than actual luck. Some boys prayed. Not many prayer required believing that someone was listening, and most climbing boys had substantial evidence to the contrary, but a few did, quietly, asking for narrow chimneys to stay open, for hot flues to cool faster, for the master to die in his sleep and leave them free. God, being busy with more important matters, generally declined to respond. The rain has softened to mist now, that particularly London phenomenon where the air simply becomes damp rather than falling in actual drops. It coats everything in a fine layer of moisture. It makes halos around the gas lamps. It turns the night into something indistinct and grey, erasing the hard edges of buildings and streets and people. You're dissolving into it bit by bit. Your boundaries are getting fuzzy. You're just a soft shape in soft darkness, breathing soft air. Nothing sharp, nothing defined, just mist, which asks nothing and offers nothing except the permission to be formless for a while. You sleep in your work clothes on your dirt floor with 5 other boys, and you dream of chimneys. This is unavoidable. They twist and branch and narrow until you can't move at all, until you're wedged so tightly that your ribs can't expand, and you wake gasping, your heart hammering, only to realize you're not stuck, you're just lying on a dirt floor in Southwark, which is only marginally better, but at least allows breathing. The master wakes you before dawn, always before dawn. Dawn is for people with leisure. You're up in the dark, eating a piece of bread, following the master through empty streets toward the day's first chimney. The pattern repeats: climb, scrape, descend, walk to the next house. Climb, scrape, descend. Your body moves automatically now, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would slow you down. You wedge yourself into the flue. You find the rhythm: back, knees, scrape, back, knees, scrape. The motion is meditative in its way, mindless, repetitive, requiring just enough attention to keep you from falling, but not enough to make you think about what you're doing or why, or for how much longer you can possibly sustain this. Some houses are better than others. You develop preferences, though preference is a luxury you can't actually exercise. The old Tudor houses have wide flues built for wood fires, relatively easy climbing, though the bricks are ancient and crumbling, likely to cut you if you're not careful. The Georgian townhouses have narrower chimneys, more efficient, harder to navigate. The new Victorian builds are worst of all. Ambitious architects designing elaborate flue systems with multiple bends and offshoots, creating labyrinths of brick that you navigate by feel and prayer and occasionally panic. You learn to read houses from the outside. The number of chimney pots tells you how many flues. The age of the brick tells you how much soot to expect. The neighborhood tells you whether the servants will give you water afterward or simply show you the door. Mayfair servants are usually kind, in that distant way of people who feel sorry for you but not sorry enough to do anything meaningful. Bloomsbury servants are efficient and cold. East End servants are barely distinguishable from you in terms of social standing, which makes them either sympathetic or resentful depending on their mood. Today brings a house in Pimlico with 7 chimneys. The housekeeper is new, nervous, unsure about letting dirty children into her clean house. The master assures her you'll touch nothing except the chimneys. This is true. You're not interested in their silver or their carpets or their comfortable lives. You're interested in climbing their chimneys and leaving and possibly eating something that isn't mostly potato. The first flue is routine. The second has a bird's nest halfway up, abandoned, thankfully, just dried twigs and grass that you scrape down along with the soot. Birds sometimes nest in unused chimneys during summer. Then winter comes, fires get lit, and the birds either flee or die depending on their reaction time. You've found dead birds before, mummified by smoke. You've also found dead rats, dead cats, dead pigeons, and once, memorably, a dead monkey that had escaped from some rich person's menagerie and chosen poorly when seeking shelter. The medical understanding of chimney sweeps' occupational hazards was minimal, largely because doctors rarely treated climbing boys, and climbing boys rarely survived long enough to develop the full spectrum of chronic conditions. The chronic cough that all sweeps developed, producing black sputum and eventually blood, the chimney sweep's cancer that appeared in their 20s, the respiratory diseases, tuberculosis, silicosis, chronic bronchitis that killed them in their 30s if the cancer didn't get them first. There were the acute injuries too, burns from climbing hot flues, broken bones from falls, suffocation from getting stuck, blunt force trauma from masters who employed physical motivation. One hospital in London kept records suggesting that climbing boys had a mortality rate of approximately 40% before age 15, though this was likely an underestimate, as many dead boys simply disappeared from the record entirely, buried in paupers' graves, unremarked, uncounted. The soot itself was the real killer. Coal soot contained dozens of carcinogenic compounds. polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, benzene, formaldehyde, arsenic from certain coal types. The boys inhaled it, ingested it, absorbed it through their skin. It accumulated in their bodies year by year, a slow poisoning that they couldn't see or feel until suddenly they could, and by then it was far too late. A few doctors tried to help. Dr. Henry Letherby published a study on the respiratory diseases of chimney sweeps. Dr. Cream Snow investigated their working conditions. But study and investigation didn't translate to treatment, and treatment wouldn't have mattered much anyway. The only real cure was to stop climbing chimneys, and stopping climbing meant starvation, which was also fatal, just faster. The rain is still falling softer now, almost apologetic. It whispers against windows, it murmurs in the gutters. It's the sound of the world gently dissolving, all the hard surfaces turning soft and vague. Your body can do the same softening, loosening, letting go of the specific shape it's been holding all day. You don't need edges right now. You can be approximate, blurry, a rough sketch of a person rather than a finished drawing. The rain doesn't judge. It falls on everything equally, the important and the irrelevant, the beautiful and the broken. The third flue narrows unexpectedly about 15 feet up. You're wedged in the usual position back against one wall, knees against the other, when suddenly the walls press closer. Not much, maybe an inch on each side, but an inch matters when you're already at maximum compression. You try to continue upward. Your back scrapes, your knees scrape. You move perhaps 6 inches and then stop, because you can't expand your chest enough to take a proper breath, and without a proper breath you can't generate the force to push yourself higher. This is fine, this is manageable. You've been in tight spots before. You just need to descend slightly, adjust your angle, try again. Except when you try to move downward, you find you can't. Something, a piece of loose brick, or a narrowing you didn't notice, or simple physics, has created a wedge effect. You're stuck, you don't panic. Panicking expands your chest, and expansion makes stuck worse. You've been taught this. You've practiced this. You breathe shallowly, slowly, and assess the situation with the clinical detachment of someone who understands that hysteria is counterproductive. You're wedged at approximately 15 feet, which means the master can't reach you with his pole. You're angled slightly, which is creating uneven pressure. Your left shoulder is jammed against a rough patch of brick. Your right knee is bearing most of your weight, and it's already going numb. You have perhaps 10 minutes before the numbness becomes a serious problem, before your leg cramps and you lose the ability to hold position at all. You call down to the master. Your voice sounds strange in the confined space, muffled, absorbed by soot and brick. Stuck, you say, which is self-evident, but protocol requires announcement. There's a pause, then the master's voice, distant and irritated, wiggle, wiggle. Excellent advice. You hadn't thought of that. You wiggle. You try shifting your weight to the right. The brick scrapes your shoulder raw, but you don't move. You try arching your back. Nothing. You try tucking your chin and compressing yourself further. This produces a 1/4 inch of downward progress and then stops, because you've reached the limit of how small you can make yourself without simply ceasing to exist. The master is conferring with the housekeeper. You can hear their voices murmuring, worried. Stuck boys are bad for business. They require intervention, knocking through walls, calling in other sweeps, sometimes involving the fire brigade if the situation becomes truly dire. All of this costs money and causes disruption, and tends to make householders reluctant to hire you again. You hear the master returning. "I'm lighting a fire," he calls up. Of course he is. The technique of lighting small fires beneath stuck boys was considered acceptable practice, even recommended by some master sweeps as the most efficient method of motivation. The principle was simple. Smoke rises, but smoke carries heat. Heat and smoke together create an environment that even the most stubbornly wedged child will make extraordinary efforts to escape. The fires were small, just straw or paper, enough smoke to be persuasive without being immediately lethal. The boys called it smoking out, said with the same casual tone you'd use for any occupational hazard. Most climbing boys experienced it at least once. Some experienced it regularly, having a tendency toward panic that required frequent motivation. The method worked, in the sense that boys who were smoked usually became unstuck. Whether this was due to renewed effort or simple terror-induced strength was debatable. The result was what mattered. There were occasional miscalculations. A fire built too large, or a boy stuck too thoroughly to respond to motivation, or a flue with poor draft that trapped smoke below the obstruction. These miscalculations were regrettable but rare enough not to fundamentally alter the practice. The sweeps maintained that the risk was minimal, that boys were resilient, that alternative methods, dismantling walls for instance, were vastly more expensive and should be reserved for genuine emergencies. The boys, naturally, had no say in the matter. It's still there, still falling, completely indifferent to chimneys and smoke and small boys wedged in uncomfortable places. It's falling on London, on the Thames, on the parks and the slums and the palaces. It doesn't distinguish, it doesn't choose. It just falls because that's what rain does, and it will keep falling long after this moment passes, long after everything passes. Your jaw can unclench. The rain doesn't need your tension, it falls just the same. You smell smoke before you see it. Then you see the faint orange glow below, diffused through the soot darkness. Then you feel the heat rising, gentle at first, then more insistent. The master has built his fire. You have perhaps 30 seconds before the smoke reaches you, perhaps 60 seconds before the heat becomes genuinely painful. Fear is useful, it turns out. Fear produces adrenaline, and adrenaline produces strength you didn't know you had. You wrench yourself sideways, feeling something tear skin, possibly muscle, definitely something that will hurt worse later. You compress yourself further, exhaling completely, making yourself concave. You push with your good leg and pull with your shoulders and twist in a way that bodies aren't meant to twist. And you move, half an inch, then an inch. Then suddenly you're descending, scraping and sliding and not caring about the skin you're leaving behind, because skin grows back and suffocating doesn't unhappen. You drop out of the chimney onto the hearth, landing in the master's small fire, which you immediately scatter with your bare feet. The housekeeper shrieks. The master grabs you by the arm and drags you away from the fireplace, beating out the embers on your trousers with his cap. You're bleeding from your shoulder and your back and both knees. You're covered in soot mixed with blood, which has created a disturbing paste. You're shaking, not from fear, just from adrenaline wearing off. The housekeeper is demanding you leave immediately. The master is apologizing and negotiating and ushering you toward the servant's entrance. Outside, he examines your injuries with professional detachment. You'll live, he concludes, which is his standard for acceptable outcomes. He doesn't dock your food for getting stuck, which counts as mercy in his accounting system. The rest of the day continues. More houses, more chimneys. Your shoulder throbs, but you climb anyway, because climbing is what you do. And pain is just information your body provides that you've learned to largely ignore. The other boys notice your limp when you return that evening. Nobody comments. Injury is commonplace. You're still climbing, which means you're fine enough. Thomas has developed a new cough, wet and rattling, the kind that suggests something has broken loose in his lungs that shouldn't have. He hacks into his hand between chimneys, examines the black-red phlegm, wipes it on his trousers. The master notices but says nothing. Thomas is nearly aged out anyway. Another few months and he'll be turned out, and what happens to him after that is not the master's concern. The master's concern is maintaining a steady supply of small, functional boys. Sentiment is expensive. William has stolen extra bread again. Henry is crying again. The pattern repeats because patterns are what happen when people have no power to change anything. You eat your watery soup. You sleep on your dirt floor. You wake before dawn. You follow the master through dark streets. You climb. Rest. The technology of chimney cleaning advanced slowly, resisted by the people it was meant to help. Mechanical sweeping devices existed, long poles with brushes attached, systems that could clean chimneys from below without requiring a child to climb inside. These devices were demonstrated publicly, endorsed by reform societies, even mandated by law in some districts. The master sweeps hated them. The devices were expensive to purchase, awkward to transport, and less effective in chimneys with multiple bends. They required 2 people to operate, one at the bottom, one at the top, which doubled labor costs. And most damningly, they were slow. A climbing boy could clean a chimney in 10 minutes. A mechanical brush took 30. Time was money. Money mattered more than children. Some masters adopted the devices grudgingly, using them for simple, straight flues while continuing to send boys up the complicated ones. Others ignored the technology entirely, calculating that the risk of fines was lower than the cost of equipment. The mechanical brushes represented progress, the same way the laws represented reform. In theory, absolutely. In practice, barely. Innovation arrived not from compassion but from architecture. As buildings grew taller and chimneys more complex, the mathematics of climbing became untenable. A boy could climb perhaps 40 feet before exhaustion or gravity won. The new buildings required 60-foot ascents, 80-foot ascents. Boys couldn't manage it. So the mechanical devices became necessary by default, adopted not because of their moral superiority, but because physics left no alternative. By the 1880s, climbing boys were becoming rare. By the 1890s, they were nearly extinct. This was progress, technically. The children who would have been climbing boys found other work: factory work, agricultural work, domestic service, begging. Different exploitation, slightly less lethal. Reform takes what victories it can get. The rain has returned, heavier now, purposeful. It's washing the city the way it does every night, carrying away the soot and the horse manure and the industrial grime, delivering it all to the Thames, which carries it to the sea, which dilutes it into nothing. This is London's cycle. Generate filth, rain falls. Filth washes away, generate more filth. Sustainable in its way, your breathing can match the rain's rhythm, steady, inevitable, requiring no thought. The rain doesn't get tired of falling. You don't have to get tired of breathing. Both things just continue because continuing is what they do. Weeks pass, months pass, you climb chimneys and eat potato soup and sleep in your clothes and wake before dawn. Your body continues its slow transformation, your knees bow further inward, your back curves. Your fingers develop their permanent bend from gripping scrapers. You're becoming the shape that chimney sweeping requires, conforming to the trade rather than the trade conforming to you. Thomas finally gets turned out. The master gives him 2 shillings and tells him to find work elsewhere. Thomas stands in the street holding his 2 shillings, looking lost. He's 13. He has no skills except climbing chimneys, and his body is already failing. The cough has gotten worse, and he's developed a limp from a fall last month that didn't heal properly. He'll probably end up in a workhouse, or dead in an alley, or possibly begging near Covent Garden if he's lucky. The master has already forgotten him and is negotiating to buy a new boy from St. Giles, a 4-year-old who'll fit in spaces Thomas never could. William becomes the senior boy. He's pleased about this. He gets marginally better food and marginally easier chimneys and the satisfaction of being slightly less doomed than everyone else. You're still in the middle of the hierarchy, old enough to be competent, young enough to fit in narrow flues. This is simultaneously job security and a slow death sentence. The new boy arrives. His name is Frederick, but the master calls him Fred, and everyone else calls him nothing because he doesn't matter yet. He's tiny, terrified, and hasn't learned not to cry during climbs. The first time the master sends him up a flue, he gets stuck immediately. Not physically stuck, just paralyzed by fear, clinging to the bricks and sobbing. The master lights a fire. Fred climbs. You watch Fred learn what you learned, that crying doesn't help, that the master's boot is inevitable if you're slow, that your body will bend in ways bodies shouldn't bend, and that's just the cost of staying alive. He's 4 years old, and already old in the ways that matter, in resignation, in acceptance, in the quiet understanding that no one is coming to save him. The seasons change, though you barely notice. Winter means more chimneys burning, more work, colder mornings. Summer means fewer fires, less income, the master getting irritable about feeding boys who aren't earning their keep. Spring and autumn are brief transitions between states of discomfort. The weather affects your work. Rain makes the soot sticky. Frost makes the bricks sharper. Heat makes the flues unbearable even when they're not actively burning. But you climb regardless because weather is not an excuse the master accepts. You begin to understand London through its chimneys. The wealthy districts have clean burning coal and regular cleanings. Easier work, less soot. The poor districts burn whatever they can afford. Cheap coal, sometimes wood, occasionally things that aren't meant to be burned at all, creating creosote buildups that are thick as tar and nearly impossible to scrape. The industrial areas have chimneys that are less chimneys and more vertical channels of chemical warfare, coated in substances you can't identify and probably shouldn't touch. You touch them anyway. You don't have gloves. The public perception of chimney sweeps occupied a strange cultural space. Part superstition, part pity, part willful ignorance. People crossed themselves when sweeps passed, or touched their buttons for luck, or hurried their children inside lest the sight of soot-covered boys give them nightmares. May Day brought the sweeps' festival, when climbing boys dressed in ribbons and gilt paper and paraded through streets, collecting pennies from crowds who found the spectacle charming in that peculiar Victorian way that confused performance with care. The festival was meant to honor sweeps or perhaps to assuage middle-class guilt, or possibly just to provide entertainment. The boys themselves received a portion of the collected money, not much but more than they usually saw. Some master sweeps participated enthusiastically, seeing it as good publicity. Others found it degrading and refused. The boys had no opinion worth consulting. Artists painted chimney sweeps, writers wrote about them. Social reformers photographed them, usually without permission, capturing their soot-blackened faces for pamphlets meant to shock comfortable readers into action. These readers would gasp at the photographs, perhaps donate a shilling to a reform society, then go home and summon their regular sweep because the drawing room chimney was smoking again and couldn't wait. The sweeps existed in this double vision, simultaneously visible and invisible, pitied and utilized, acknowledged as suffering while remaining available for employment. It was very convenient, this arrangement. It allowed people to feel compassionate without actually changing anything. The rain's gone soft again, that barely there mist that doesn't fall so much as hover. It's neither here nor there, committed to nothing, bothering no one. Your thoughts can do the same, not quite present, not quite absent, just drifting in that space between attention and sleep, where nothing needs to be decided or remembered or figured out. The mist will settle eventually, so will you. There's no rush. Time is doing its work without your supervision, and it matters less each year, which makes climbing for 3 years, which makes you a veteran. Fred is 7 and competent. William is 12 and starting to grow too large for the narrowest chimneys, which means he's approaching his expiration date. The master is already watching younger boys at hiring fairs, calculating who might replace William when physics makes him obsolete. He got stuck in a flue in Clerkenwell, a complicated chimney with a bend that closed tighter than expected. The master tried smoking him out, but Henry was wedged too thoroughly to respond. They had to knock through the bedroom wall to extract him, by which time he'd suffocated. The householder was furious about the wall. The master was annoyed about losing his investment. Henry was buried in a pauper's grave somewhere in Suffolk, unmarked, forgotten within a week. The master bought a replacement, a 6-year-old named John, who cries less than Henry did, which the master considers an improvement. The work continues. Boys are interchangeable components. When one breaks, you purchase another. This is simply how businesses operate. Your body is developing its permanent damage now. The cough is constant. Your knees are bowed. Your spine has a curve that won't straighten. Your hands shake sometimes, a tremor you can't control. The older sweeps have it too. William's hands shake, and you've seen adult sweeps in the street with the same tremor. It's something that happens, part of the trade, like the black phlegm and the aching joints and the certainty that you won't live to be old. You've started seeing the sores. Small ones, on your inner thighs where the soot accumulates. They itch, then burn, then simply persist. Red, angry patches that don't heal. William has them worse. He showed you once, pulling down his trousers in the alley, pointing to the ulcerated skin. "It's the soot," he said, "which you already knew. Everyone knows. The soot gets in and doesn't come out, and eventually it poisons you from the inside. There are no doctors for climbing boys. Doctors cost money, and you don't have money, and your master isn't spending his money on medical care when he can simply purchase a replacement boy for less than a doctor's consultation fee. So you manage the sores yourself, washing them when you can find water, which isn't often, covering them with rags when they bleed, ignoring them when they burn. This is what passes for healthcare in your profession. William turns 13 and gets turned out, just like Thomas before him. The master gives him 3 shillings this time, slightly more generous than Thomas received, possibly because William stole less than expected, or possibly because the master was in a good mood. William takes his 3 shillings and disappears into London. You'll probably never see him again. Ex-climbing boys don't stay in touch. They scatter to workhouses and factories and early graves, and the ones who survive don't like to remember where they came from. You're the senior boy now. This brings marginal benefits. An extra piece of bread, slightly easier chimneys, the privilege of sleeping nearest the wall instead of in the middle of the pile. It also brings the knowledge that you're next. In another year, maybe 2, you'll be too large to fit in chimneys, and the master will turn you out with a few shillings and the assurance that you've learned a trade. Which is technically true, except that the trade is dying, and even if it weren't, your body is already too damaged to practice it much longer. The 1875 Public Health Act gave enforcement powers that previous laws had lacked. Police could enter premises, inspect chimneys, fine masters who employed young children. More importantly, the act made householders liable. If you allowed a climbing boy in your chimney, you could be prosecuted too. This changed the mathematics considerably. Suddenly, householders preferred mechanical brushes, not from compassion but from self-preservation. The mechanical devices improved. They became cheaper, more efficient, better designed. Entrepreneurial sweeps adopted them and undercut the old masters on price. The old masters, stubbornly clinging to boys, found their client base shrinking. Some adapted, some retired, some simply died, taking their practices with them. By 1890, climbing boys were rare curiosities. By 1900, they'd effectively vanished from London. The rural areas maintained the practice, small villages where everyone knew everyone, where magistrates looked the other way, where tradition outweighed law. The boys themselves dispersed into the general population of Victorian poor, indistinguishable from factory workers and dock labourers, and the thousands of other damaged children that industrialization produced and discarded. No one tracked what happened to former climbing boys. No follow-up studies examined their health outcomes or life expectancies. They simply disappeared from the historical record the same way they'd existed within it, as background, as footnotes, as the barely visible infrastructure supporting comfortable lives. The rain has committed now, falling steadily, washing everything clean in that temporary way that rain cleans, removing the surface dirt while leaving the deeper stains intact. It's drumming on rooftops, gurgling in downspouts, turning the streets into rivers of runoff. You can hear it everywhere and nowhere, surrounding you, defining the space around you by filling it with sound. Your breathing can disappear into it, your thoughts can dissolve into it, just rain falling and falling, endless and purposeless, and perfectly content with both. When the master tells you he's switching to mechanical brushes, not entirely, he'll keep you on for complicated chimneys, the ones the brushes can't manage. But mostly he's done with climbing boys. The economics have shifted, the laws have tightened. The clients prefer machines to children, which is progress, technically. Your employment becomes sporadic. Some weeks you climb 5 chimneys, some weeks you climb none. The master feeds you less, proportional to your reduced utility. You're becoming obsolete. Aging out, not by growing too large, but by becoming unnecessary. The trade is leaving you behind. You find other work, odd jobs, sweeping streets, which is ironic, hauling coal, which is more ironic, running errands for shopkeepers who pay in pennies and expired bread. You're one of thousands of London children scraping by, damaged but functional, poor but not yet starving, surviving in that grey space between employment and destitution. Your cough gets worse, the sores get worse, your hands shake constantly now. You're 11 years old with the body of someone much older, someone whose body has been used up and discarded before its time. This is normal. This is what happens to climbing boys. You knew this was coming. Everyone knew this was coming. Sometimes you see other former climbing boys in the street. You recognize them by their bow-legged walk, their hunched backs, their persistent coughs. You don't speak. There's nothing to say. You survived. They survived. That's all there is. The master dies when you're 12, not dramatically, just the ordinary death of an ordinary man who drank too much and worked too hard and caught pneumonia one winter and didn't recover. His wife sells the business, such as it is. The remaining boys get distributed to other masters or turned out or sent to workhouses. You're turned out with 5 shillings and the clothes you're wearing, which is more or less what you expected. You find a room in a boarding house in Whitechapel, a corner of a room really, shared with 4 other people. You find work in a factory making matches, which pays poorly but doesn't require climbing. The work is monotonous, and the phosphorus fumes are slowly poisoning you, but you're already being poisoned by soot, so the phosphorus is just adding to the collection. You're 13, 14, 15. The years blur. The cough produces blood now. The sores have spread. Your hands shake so badly you can barely hold the matchsticks. You're let go from the factory. You find work sweeping streets again. Then that ends too. You're 16 and your body is failing in comprehensive, irreversible ways. You die at 17 in a charity hospital in Southwark, of respiratory failure, of soot accumulation, of chimney sweeps cancer, of all the delayed consequences of spending your childhood breathing coal tar in narrow spaces. The nurse who records your death writes chimney sweep as your occupation, though you haven't climbed a chimney in 5 years. It's what you were. It's what killed you. It's all anyone needs to know. It will fall after you're gone. It falls on the chimneys you climbed and the houses you cleaned and the streets where you walked. It falls on everything equally, making no distinctions, playing no favorites, washing the soot away and bringing fresh soot with the next fire. And you can rest now. The climbing is finished. The chimneys are clean. Your breath can slow and finally stop, and the rain will keep falling, steady and purposeless and peaceful. The way rain falls, the way sleep comes, the way all things end. Good night.